1865, the Civil War had just come to an abrupt end, leaving the Americans and people native to Chicago separated and tense. 6 years after the war, which left the country in anguish, with brothers pinned against each other's throats, a crippling fire set ablaze to most of Chicago. To further the exhaust of the frustration of Chicagoans, this was happening in the midst of a Gilded Age, which can be illustrated by forensic industrial growth, massive migration, and class violence, which can be shown evident by Chicago's Haymarket Square bombing. Perpetual social conflicts led American politicians and congressmen to follow in the footsteps of their paternal influence, which was England. They originally held the first World Fair in 1851 in hopes that it would tout ideas of global expansion of the British Empire. It would also used as a tool to counter allegations of political radicalism. The success of their fair led to opposing countries to host fairs of their own. The World Fair had already taken place in America before 1867. In Philadelphia, which was such a failure that it left people in doubts that America could host a successful World Fair, 1867. In times of economical uncertainty, the fair showed potential to stimulate commercial profit as well as heighten the value of local homes. Exposition backers were also always looking to find a way in any situation, more prestige for themselves and their native cities. Congress had to choose which was the victor of the coveted title, that is, the host of the Colombian Exposition. The two contenders were New York and Chicago, due to their surplus of financial resources. New York's economic powerhouses pledged $15 million if Congress gave New York the World Fair, not to be outdone by Chicago's leading capitalists, which managed to raise the bid. They further raised such bid by selling stock subscriptions to everybody and their mamas. The decision to make Chicago the host of the World Fair was made on. The Exposition backers were jubilant but had no time to celebrate. In fact, they didn't have any time for anything from that point until the end of the fair.
No exposition in the 19th century could possess with such potential and success than the World's Colombian Exposition in 1893. With the great standards they were introduced which future fairs were measured by. It was the first exposition to have the privilege to have 50 foreign countries and 43 states to attend. The opening gathered as much as 700,000 people. It brought stability and great change. It encouraged Americans to unity and serenity. As the World Fair was growing with impressive development, it helped Chicago with a great deal in themes to culture and such others related to it. With this, it led a new way to a more popular guidance to refine Chicago for the better of its people and economic. Culture and entertainment had a compelling interest to Chicago in 1893, as stories, songs, jokes, and art gave a new aspect to people which they never been exposed to. Manufacturers and the liberal arts was a showcase for Americans' production to show a better way to sell. By this action, food production rose to a great heights never seen before, as agriculture got finer as it changed to quality over quantity. New technology and trade was brought to the table as it benefited society, advancing with greater heights, leaving Chicago an abundant legacy behind. By this action, this gave a great rise to Chicago's reputation as its
Architecture was a huge factor in the Chicago World Fair of 1893. Not only was it for aesthetics, but it also had functionality. Chicago is or was known to be the White City because of the Court of Honor, but not only was it named this, other reasons of why it was because of the divine classical architecture, and as well as the buildings were cladded of white stucco, also to be illuminated by street lights, but the bright stucco building illuminated the city to overshine the tenements of Chicago. To an extent, the White City was able to guide the City Beautiful movement, able to foundate the modern city planning. These beautiful landscape structures, promenades, and more would not be possible if architects, designers, planners, and landscapers did not work and cooperate together to be able to form an extravagant yet simple modern design, plan, and schemes. Without this, the White City would have never been established and would have not been able to spread and inspire many other cities, such as in focusing on the beautification and the components. Many of the municipal government played a big role on having control on streets, public buildings, and spaces, as well as municipal art. There were many architects that influenced the world's Colombian Exposition. The lead architects was chief executive Daniel H. Burnham and his partner John Wellborn Root, who ended passing during the preparation of the expedition due to pneumonia. Their nomination had brought them because they were most successful partnerships locally and nationwide. They gained recognition for designing and constructing about $40 million in buildings. With this outstanding record led them to be a consulting architects during the World's Fair. Stated from a source was the duty of the chief of construction. The duty of the chief of construction was broadly stated to select, organize, and control all forces needed to prepare the grounds and erect the building for the exposition. These forces were those of surveys and grades, landscape works, architecture, sculpture, decoration, general superintendence, sewers, water and fire protection, steam plant and other machinery, electrical plant, transportation of persons and goods, guard and secret service, fire department, medical department, construction accounts, purchasing attorneys. In 1893, architects were already discussing on how that fair might influence the future architecture. An article found in the Chicago Daily Tribune of an architect named S.S. Beeman on his outlook. In 1893, architects were already discussing on how that fair might influence future architecture. An article found in the Chicago Daily Tribune of an architect, S.S. Beeman, on his outlook. Your request for an opinion as to the influence that the Colombian Exposition will exert upon the architecture of this country almost tempts one to enter the realm of romance. To my mind, however, the chief value of this great architectural object lessons lies in the fact that it will awaken the masses to a broader and higher appreciation of our architecture. I believe that the effect of architecture of the Exposition will be to hold the development of American architecture to the conservative and refined lines of the classic and Renaissance types. An analysis from the same source states Beeman was correct in his assumption that the architecture will rouse visitors and result in an explosion of classical architecture. Nevertheless, not everyone was pleased with the homogeneous white neoclassical buildings. Louis Sullivan, one of the architects of the Colombian Exposition and one of its harshest critics, argued against it. The slavish copying of Greco-Roman structure. While it is debatable what effect Root's death had on the final plans of the fair, his sister-in-law believed that the architecture at that exposition would have been more colorful and festive had his designs been carried out. The only surviving structures that is still standing till this day is the Field Museum of Natural History.
There are countless amounts of names that stand out when you say 1893 World Fair. To name them all would exceed our time limit. So without further ado, I present H.H. Holmes, or the Devil in the White City. He has gone down in the history books as America's first serial killer. He built a hotel in the midst of the World Fair that historians have dubbed the Castle, to lure in naive foreign victims. Another title of a name that comes to mind would have to be Daniel H. Berg. He was an architect, and he was also chief executive of preparation for the exposition. He gained this title for his visionary blueprints and rebuilding of the city, who had been victim to a fire which left over half the city scorched. Joplin was a revolutionary, not just in the name of Chicago, but in the name of music. He created ragtime music with introducing to the masses the entertainer, which would later revolutionize music.
The World Fair provided the United States to a new holiday, known as Columbus Day. It gave rise to a new method indicating patriotism in school systems, the Pledge of Allegiance. With the hard work of people's sweat and effort, the Colombian Exposition was one of the most spectacular constructions to be built in that era of time. The value on exhibits and education was a great influence to people as they wanted to move forward and forget the past from what they were known for, to a more advanced society group. Making Chicago stronger in new ways were sprouting from the different diverse cultures they were exposed to in the World Fair. Not wanting to be left behind, Chicago tried to get stronger. One of them was in military. New tactics and methods were evolved in the training. Enforcing the law and getting rid of the dark, troublesome infection that corrupted their country played a big part. Eager to change the face of America and evolve as a country for the better of its people. The World Colombian Exposition was a stepping stone that was crucial to Chicago. With this help, it left a great legacy behind. Great structures were built which had never been seen before. Food production increased, economics grew, culture expanded, and new techniques were introduced in many aspects which refined Chicago.